Sorry, everybody. The federal government doesn't have enough money to extend healthcare subsidies in the Affordable Care Act, but there is enough money to pay 8 Republican senators $500,000 each because Donald Trump and Rudy Giuliani reached out to them on the days leading up to and during the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol. That's what Senate Republicans said when they snuck in a provision in the spending bill that would reopen the federal government that allowed 8 Republican senators to sue the federal government over the fact that their phone metadata was searched lawfully at the time by Jack Smith over the course of the Arctic frost investigation that became the January 6th investigation. I'm going to read from that bill on today's show, and if it doesn't make you furious, you aren't paying close enough attention. I'm Adam Klasfeld, and you're watching All Rise News here on Legal AF, part of the Midas Touch Network. Take a moment to hit subscribe now. Now, the story that I'm reading out, the language of the provision, it was first reported by the New York Times under this headline, quote, "Spending bill would pave way for senators to sue over phone searches," end quote. And the devil here is very much in the details. The provisions here let 8 Republican senators whose phone records, phone metadata, known as toll records, were accessed as part of the January 6th investigation, would be given a right to sue the federal government, which is under the control of Donald Trump's Justice Department, to bring this lawsuit against the federal government where the minimum damages, the floor, is $500,000. Here's the statute that's tucked into the spending bill. Cause of action. Any senator whose Senate data or the Senate data of whose Senate office has been acquired, subpoenaed, searched, accessed, or disclosed in violation of this section may bring a civil action against the United States if the violation was committed by an officer, employee, or agent of the United States or any federal department or agency. The relief under this: if a senator prevails on a claim under this section, the court shall award for each instance of a violation of this section the greater of statutory damages of $500,000 or the amount of actual damages, reasonable attorney fees and the costs of litigation, and any injunctive or declaratory relief as may be appropriate. And you might be wondering, what damages? The January 6th investigation didn't charge any of these senators with a crime. This was lawfully accessed information as part of a grand jury investigation. This was metadata. Despite what Ted Cruz and other senators are saying, there were no wiretaps here. They wanted to know who Donald Trump and Rudy Giuliani were trying to talk to in their effort to subvert a free and fair election. But they don't need to prove damages under this statute. If they prevail under this statute, they get $500,000, all 8 of them. And you might be wondering, wait a minute, how could they pass this law now? The investigation was in the past. Well, this law, if passed, would apply retroactively, and it punishes any, quote, acquisition, subpoena, search, accessing, or disclosure occurring on or after January 1st, 2022. And Senate Republicans have been going on about this for months, about how Jack Smith, in their words, spied, he didn't spy, but spied, in their words, on 8 Republican senators because they looked at this document that we broke down in a previous episode of All Rise News that was dated September of 2023. So that would be covered by this law. And it names 8 senators in this. They are Lindsey Graham, Bill Hagerty, Josh Hawley, Dan Sullivan, Tommy Tuberville, Ron Johnson, Cynthia Loomis, and Marsha Blackburn. And as an aside here, the memo also mentions a GOP House representative, Mike Kelly, but he isn't covered by this statute because the senators apparently were only concerned about the damages that they would be awarded if they got to sue the federal government. We'll see what the House has to say about that as an aside. But we know, despite the Senate Republicans trying to gin up some sort of scandal about a lawful investigation looking into what the actual target of that investigation, Donald Trump, was doing in the days leading up to, who he was calling on Capitol Hill in the days leading up to January 6th, that he wrote about that. Jack Smith wrote about that in his report. He had cited the toll records when discussing Trump and Giuliani's calls, their outreach to Capitol Hill to try to block the certification of former President Joe Biden's lawful victory in a free and fair election. That's what this is about. They want to literally make a federal lawsuit about that and take $500,000 in taxpayer money apiece for them in the supposed damages that is absolutely beggars imagination as to what those damages could actually be. I'm going to read a little bit from the Senate report on the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol. And they describe those calls. Quote, after he spoke with President Trump, Giuliani's phone calls went nearly without fail to members of Congress, Senator Marsha Blackburn, who was on that list, and then Senator Mike Lee. He made 3 calls to Senator Bill Hagerty, who again was on that list, then to Representative Jim Jordan, who was not. He called Senator Lindsey Graham, Senator Josh Hawley, and Senator Ted Cruz. Giuliani had 2 calls with Senator Dan Sullivan over the course of the evening. Now, a common theme in here, many of the senators described on this January 6th committee report are on the list of the people whose call records, whose toll records federal prosecutors were scrutinizing in Trump's January 6th investigation. I want to also point out a couple of quotes from the New York Times coverage of this. They reached out to lawyers for Jack Smith for a response to this. And here's what Jack Smith's lawyer said. Mr. Smith, through his lawyers, has denied any wrongdoing, saying it was a legitimate and authorized investigative tactic to understand the actions of Mr. Trump and his inner circle, suggesting it was not meant to scrutinize the actions of the lawmakers themselves. So again, the target of the investigation was Donald Trump. But Senator Ron Wyden goes farther. He says, Senator Ron Wyden, Democrat of Oregon, accused Republicans of hiding a provision in the funding bill that would give millions of taxpayer dollars, quote, to a handful of Republican senators who helped Trump try to overthrow the government. And Wyden isn't mincing words here, because some of the people on this list, Josh Hawley, the person who put up his fist in a salute to rioters outside the Capitol, to Lindsey Graham, who reached out to Brad Raffensperger right after Trump lost, and in the lead up to the days in between Trump's loss in the 2020 election and the January 6th Capitol riot and insurrection. Lindsey Graham reached out to Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, and Raffensperger accused him of suggesting that ballots should be thrown out to help Trump. And those are some of the names on this list. Now, another thing about Senator Wyden here. Senator Wyden is one of probably the most prominent senator on the subject of data security. He's saying this isn't about data security. This is about rewarding the people who Trump turned to after he lost the 2020 presidential election to try to subvert a free and fair election, as he puts it. The Republican senators who helped Trump try to overthrow the government. Ron Wyden was one of the lions of the Senate who had tried to rein in and helped rein in the abuses of privacy by the NSA And he is a leader on this issue. And he's saying this isn't about data security. This is about paying 8 Republican senators $500,000 apiece for a lawful investigation with taxpayer money. You've been watching All Rise News here on Legal AF, part of the Midas Touch Network. To find out more about my reporting, visit www.allrisenews.com. That's www.allrisenews.com. You can get a free subscription or a paid subscription, and either will help sustain the work that I do. If you become a paid subscriber, you unlock full access and allow me to do my work, to go into the courts, to dive deep into the documents, read the provisions that aren't part of the wider coverage, and to bring it in digestible fashion to you in these videos. And to make sure that you don't miss the next video, take a moment to hit subscribe here on Legal AF, and I'll see you next time.
Can't get your fill of Legal AF? Me neither. That's why we formed the Legal AF Substack. Every time we mention something in a hot take, whether it's a court filing or a oral argument, come over to the Substack. You'll find the court filing and the oral argument there, including a daily roundup that I do called, wait for it, Morning AF. What else? All the other contributors from Legal AF are there as well. We got some new reporting. We got interviews. We got ad-free versions of the podcast and hot takes. Where? Legal AF on Substack. Come over now to free subscribe.